Hello, everyone, and welcome to you wherever you're dialing in from across the world. You're most welcome here. My name is Lawrence Webb. I'm the president of IOSH, and I'm really pleased that you've taken the time to join what, for me personally, is a hugely important subject area. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I should say that closed captioning is available for those of you who would like to use it. But I should also apologise now for the way that my accent is transcribed. For anybody that's seen any of my LinkedIn posts recently where I deliberately turn on the closed captioning, I've said all sorts of weird and wonderful things that I've had to go back and correct. But please enable that through the function if you'd like to. Now, this is a really important topic for me personally, as I said earlier, and I've deliberately made this a focus area for my presidential year. And it's not a 12-month vanity project. It's something that I really want to make inroads with on behalf of our members, on behalf of employers and the profession as a whole. And I'm really taking the advantage to increase both the understanding and the opportunity. Now, this is the first of a number of webinars, and today is very much about getting the basics right and sort of scratching that surface, really. And we've got two fantastic panel members that I'll introduce in a minute. And we were saying just before this webinar started, we could easily talk about this subject and probably just one or two questions over the period of an entire day. We don't have that luxury, unfortunately, but hopefully by the close of play today, you'll have an appetite for the other three sessions that come after this one. But we really want to give you the knowledge and the tools and the confidence to actually start engaging in this topic area, because neurodiversity and its diagnosis is becoming much more prevalent now, and rightly so. And it's estimated that something like 1 in 7 people are actually neurodivergent. So to put that into perspective, that's more than 15% of the UK. And if you take the people that actually signed up initially for this webinar today, that was 420 people, which means that around 60 potentially are neurodiverse. And this is a missed opportunity because the lack of awareness and understanding is a missed opportunity for those who are confirmed as neurodivergent, those who don't know they are, and of course those of us who are also neurotypical. So today we're going to cover the basics. We're going to focus on what is neurodiversity. We're going to look at the sort of whole education piece about what this actually means and why it's important. You know, what is it? What is it not? But to kick things off, I want to share just a very quick personal story about just how impactful misunderstanding and preconceptions can be when it comes to neurodiversity. Because my daughter, she's got autism. She's 22 now, and I mean, she sort of struggled in her early school days because of a lack of understanding and awareness before her diagnosis. And I mean, for myself and my wife as parents, it was difficult because we didn't understand the sort of characteristics that Catherine was showing. And when she was at school, she started to become quite anxious about going to school, particularly as she got older. And after she had a diagnosis, she came to us one day and she said, I need to talk to you because I never want to go to another maths lesson again. And I said, oh, okay. What is it about maths particularly? And she said, I look at letters on a page or on a spreadsheet or whatever they're working on. She said, and they literally just fizzle away in front of me. She said, because I don't understand. I don't understand numbers. You've spent years trying to teach me all about numbers and fractions using pizzas and coins. And she said, I really struggle. I don't get it. And I said, well, okay. I said, but we can work together a lot more. She said, well, it's not you. She said, because now the teachers know I have autism, what they're doing is they're basically putting me at the front of the room to say, you'll be fantastic with numbers. So therefore, Catherine, solve this problem. And she actually felt like she was being quite bullied and singled out. And she's really started to dislike school purely because of that one thing. And it's a very simple example, but it really is an important area to understand, whatever your place of work is, because otherwise we are alienating people when we don't mean to, and that's absolutely no good for anybody. So that's why, just one of the reasons why for me this is so important. That example alone doesn't just validate the importance of understanding neurodiversity, but how common it is that it's actually misunderstood and viewed perhaps as a problem or a limitation, rather than recognised and harnessed and often stereotyped. And one of my team in my day job, who is neurodiverse, she says, don't look at me and the way that I work and the way that I think as a difficulty. It's not a difficulty, it's a difference. So we owe it to all those brilliant neurodiverse people out there to be better educated, to enable, facilitate, help and support them make the most of their power skills. So if there's one thing I want us to get out of today, it's that education and the building of that understanding. And to help me do that, I'm delighted to introduce our two panel members. First of all, if I can start with Fayola Francis. Fayola is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, or EDI, lead at the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health, IOSH. Now, this leading role includes transformation, developing a strategy, implementing initiatives to embed EDI across IOSH. And day to day, that means championing and driving cultural change, both internally and externally. And her work is broad, but it aims to help IOSH drive inclusion as an employer, a membership organisation and a professional body. And Fayola's passionate about responsible business, and prior to joining IOSH had other roles in inclusion and diversity, but also sustainability and well-being. And Fayola's work with her past team led to them winning the Business in the Community Responsible Business Champion Award. So welcome, Fayola, how are you doing?
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction. I'm well, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for being here. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Mark Charlesworth. Mark has a passion for helping people, and so wrote the Neurodiversity Guidebook. And if that wasn't enough, he also wrote the 11 Principles of Neurodiversity Inclusion. Mark's an engaging and talented public speaker on neurodevelopmental conditions and speaks with authenticity, sharing the extra knowledge from himself, who actually has ADHD, autism, spectrum condition, Asperger's, as well as PTSD and epilepsy. And Mark began his career in retail, customer service and domestic insurance, because he thrived on detail and problem solving. And this focus, helping others, excited Mark and led him to a world of coaching, training and consulting with individuals, as well as large and small organisations about neurodevelopmental conditions. So welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for stepping in so lastminute.com as Professor James Brown couldn't. Good to see you here.
Oh, thank you. Fab introduction. And this the late entry to the party is kind of perfect for ADHD. We love a crisis. If there isn't one, we create one. So thanks for a great introduction, and thanks for having me.
No, thank you, Mark. And actually, I'm going to start with you with a straightforward question. Actually, it's very general, but what is neurodiversity?
Okay, Judy Singer coined the phrase neurodiversity back in the 1990s, and she herself is autistic, and she was piecing together a sociology thesis, and she was referring to her daughter who is autistic and how she is neurodiverse from most of the population who are neurotypicals. That's now branched out into include other neurodevelopmental conditions such as ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, and so on. Some people think, you could argue that neurodiverse is everybody, and where do you stop? Yeah, but you have to draw a line somewhere. But in short, you're neurodiverse because of a specific neurodevelopmental condition, which affects the way you think, process, recite, recall, retain, learn, and with autism, how you socially interact too.
Okay, that's great. That's a great opening. No, great opening remarks, Mark. Thanks for that. Fiola, anything to add?
Yeah, so I would just add that when we talk about neurodiversity, it's recognizing that people experience the world in so many different ways. There's no one right way of thinking, of learning, of behaving. You might hear people talking about neurotypical people, who are individuals whose brain functions and ways of processing information and behaviours are seen as standard, as the norm. So in line with, whatever is societally normal. And neurodivergent describes individuals whose brains work in a way that's outside of those norms. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It doesn't mean that you're deficient or broken or needing to be fixed. It's just recognizing that there's a different way of thinking. And neurodiversity fits into a wider social model of disability. So that was developed in the 80s by disabled activists just to really reframe how we think about disability. So it's the opposite of the medical model, which views people as being disabled by their difference, needing to be cured, needing to be fixed. So, looking at someone and thinking, oh, that poor person, if only they could do what I can do. And actually, the social model sees people as being disabled by an inaccessible, uninclusive world. So, if we set really rigid parameters of what's normal. So examples like if you imagine a wheelchair user at the bottom of some stairs under the medical model, you might think, oh, what a shame. What if only there was a cure and they could walk again to get upstairs? And the social model would just say, well, why isn't there a ramp? So neurodiversity, recognizing that there's this whole range of different ways of thinking, fits within that social model. We want to change the environment, change the culture, not the individual.
Okay, so it's a great segue into what I was going to ask next, actually. And maybe if we stick with yourself, Fiola, I mean, why is it then such a big topic area in the workplace now, and why do you think it's so important that we're discussing it today?
Yeah, I think it's a relevant topic always, because you don't stop being neurodivergent when you go to work. So many people can mask signs of their neurodivergence, which means they can hide them, they can force themselves to appear neurotypical, but ultimately they're still neurodivergent. You can't leave your dyslexia at home when you go into the office, or turn off your autism when you're responding to emails in your inbox or anything. So we know that there is this diversity within our organisations. It's estimates say between 15 and 20% of the population is neurodivergent. So you already have neurodivergent people in your workplace. And we know that inclusion benefits everyone. So more inclusive workplaces have been shown to be more profitable, more productive, happier, more resilient, more creative. I could go on and on just about the benefits of an inclusive workplace. And I think it's really important. There's something called the drop curb effect. So if you lower the edge of the pavement, it makes it easier for wheelchair users, right? But also it benefits anyone pushing a pram, or if you've just got tired legs, or you're a child and you don't want a big step up. And actually it's the same in the workplace. So being more inclusive overall of neurodivergent people can actually benefit everyone. So having proofreading software as the norm is great for dyslexic colleagues, but it's also brilliant for everyone. We all make typos, we all make mistakes, and that can help catch them. So actually talking about this is really relevant, because being neuro-inclusive is actually being inclusive of a whole different range of people, and we all gain from it.
100% see the world exactly the same way. It's a win-win-win-win-win-win-win so many times for me. I agree 100%. I mean, Mark, you're out there dealing with different organizations, and we're going to come to future webinars looking at what it's like for future leaders and then employers, and then wrap all this together with what we can actually go and do to make the best of the world. But what are you seeing in the workplace? Why do you think this has become such a big topic?
Going back a few years, neurodiversity wasn't really known about, or it was a minority of people, if you like, and we didn't really know about ADHD and things like that until recent years. And then, like I say, it's disability now encompasses, even though a lot of people are neurodiverse don't see themselves as disabled, but I sit on the fence on that. I don't mind. There's legislation in place, the Equality Act, of course, but also morality and values, and I think all these things have come together. And also, when people have started to recognise that, oh, I've got that condition, I've got a condition, and then when people start talking, it kind of it feeds, and it's like a positive contagion, and people get to understand it and think, hang on a minute, ADHD is a really good asset to have in an organisation.
Yeah.
MI5, they're celebrating the fact that they take on lots of neurodiverse people. There's an Israeli Air Force unit, satellite imagery unit, and they have autistic people who are great at pattern spotting. And obviously the satellites go across, they spot any differences, and so it progresses. And I think it's now recognised that, yes, we might think differently, but isn't it good that we're all thinking differently, so we all come to the best conclusion? Not my conclusion, not your conclusion, but the best conclusion. And I think organisations are recognising that. There was a Cloverpot published a report a couple of years ago about diverse thinking. Neurodiversity wasn't included in that report, but it goes without saying. But the more diverse a team, I think Fiola, you touched on this a minute ago, the more diverse a team, the quicker and the better the decision making.
Absolutely.
And it was talking about gender and also ethnicity, but it goes without saying that if you had neurodiversity in there, we think outside the box and so on. And I think, yeah, companies recognise there's a moral dimension to this, and I think we are becoming more, what's the word, moralistic, virtuous. But also there's profit in this. You know, if you want the best people for the job, who are going to be the most efficient and the most productive, neurodiverse people, a lot of the time we are.
And absolutely, and if you can make the most of that set of power skills and map it against the needs of an organisation or a team or a particular project, I mean, as I said, it's a win-win. But why do you think so many people are actually diagnosed later in life, and you know, from what you see out there, what impact does a lack of diagnosis actually have on people at work?
Now, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 32, born in 78, so a few years ago. And I think this is a generational thing. Future generations will get a diagnosis a lot earlier. But I think my generation and those immediately following will be diagnosed later. But because we didn't, as I say, we didn't know about it. We were blind to it. We didn't know it was there. You just put it down to it. I was just put down to, oh, he's eccentric. Okay, that's fair enough. I'm happy with that label. Yeah, I'll move on. But we've got a lot more understanding now. So I think we're getting recognised in ourselves a lot earlier, whether we've got these conditions or not. So I'm going to answer the second part.
Yeah, just the lack of diagnosis. You know.
Yeah, the lack of diagnosis. So the lack of diagnosis for me. I got a leg. Going back earlier, that's one thing I was going to say was scaffolding. When you're at school and things become highlighted when you start school, because and education, you're going through that process, and when you're asked to do certain tasks and they're difficult, so that might highlight a condition. But at the same time, you've got lots of scaffolding around you. Soon as you move out of home and the scaffolding falls away, yes, your parents are still there, your friends are still there, but you're then living on your own or with a partner. You haven't got that scaffolding, so it becomes prominent. So early adulthood, that's when you start to become aware as well. Lack of diagnosis, it can cause a whole range of problems. I've noticed a lot of the time, a lot of friction between, say, neurodiverse employee and colleagues, because they don't know about that person's condition. And I know one case where as soon as I said, I've got ADHD, that's why I'm not as off the cuff questions in meetings. And sorry, okay. All I wanted to do was help. And they made adjustments, and that person's thriving now. But you can't move forward and thrive in the wrong environment. Now, it might be the right organization, but it might be with adjustments, it then becomes the right environment. It might be this person was sat near Gatwick Airport, and she couldn't understand why she was getting distracted all the time and not focused. I was like, well, turn your desk around. It's just a simple thing. 10 minutes, there was a plane. I'm like, oh, I'm better focused now. Once you know, we don't have as a species an operating manual. But as soon as you've got a diagnosis for something, you've got an operating manual. Because when you start to read about that condition, like I used to think I was thick and stupid because black piece of paper in front of me, all the words here, and it's the same with those with dyslexia as well. You can't get your thoughts out onto paper. And you're like, why can't I, write this talk, this report, this letter? And it takes ages. And I thought, I'm thick, I'm stupid. And you get embarrassed and stressed. Well, now you know that's what that is. You stop fighting with your own brain. It's better for your own well-being. Managers can better plan for it and organize. And with organization, we become efficient and caring. And I think a lack of diagnosis means you try to fit in, but you don't know how to. So you will never ever fit in whatever format. But with a diagnosis, or at least a self-awareness of, I've got a condition, this is what I need, you can actually relax and do what you need to do.
I mean, everything you've said, I recognise. I mean, in terms of yourself, Fiola, is this what you see in the work that you've done before and in the work that you're doing with IOSH now? Yeah,
it is. I think it's such an important topic around late diagnosis, and I know there's been a lot of press coverage on this recently. And as Mark said, a lot of the reason that more people are being diagnosed currently isn't that there's more prevalence. We've not all become more neurodivergent. Actually, it's that there's more information. There's less stigma. There's more public figures who are saying, oh, actually, yeah, I'm say Emma Watson, who has ADHD, or Steve Jobs, who was dyslexic. People who are public figures who are successful saying, this is my reality. And because of things like that, there is more conversation around it, which means people are able to say, actually, I maybe recognize some of those characteristics in myself. However, we know that neurodivergent conditions are often underdiagnosed, in certain groups. So, for example, women are less likely to be diagnosed with autism or ADHD, particularly when you're looking at those early diagnoses as children, and similarly for people from ethnic minority groups. And a lot of that is arguably because the whole thing around neurodiversity is that your brain works in a way which is outside of societal norms. And if we live in a culture, in a Western culture, the likelihood is that a lot of those norms are constructed around white men. And so if you're different to that in some way, you might slip under the radar. So we know that late diagnosis is disproportionately affecting women. It's disproportionately affecting people from ethnic minority communities. And if you tick both of those boxes, as I can personally attest to, you are even more likely to get a late in life diagnosis. And obviously at the moment, there are a lot of backlogs for assessments in the UK and elsewhere because demand's just outstripping the number of professionals trained to make a diagnosis. In the UK, the NHS doesn't provide adult assessments for dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. So if you miss out while you're at school, if people don't pick up on it and they sort of dismiss it, then you're likely to need to pay to go private. And things like that really show that diagnosis is a privilege. It's not equal for all. So, I've already talked about the groups who are less likely to be diagnosed during childhood, which means you make it to adulthood without a diagnosis. You might think that you're inadequate, you might doubt yourself, that might affect your confidence, your mental health. It can be really fatiguing, exhausting, trying to keep up when adjustments haven't been made. And then once you get to adulthood, there's this gap between those who can afford to go private or simply have the agency, the confidence to ask, to seek a diagnosis, versus those who don't. And I think there's been lots of studies that have shown, and I've seen this in my work and my own personal experience as well, that receiving a late diagnosis can be a whirlwind of emotions. So positive ones: relief, understanding, excitement at being able to, create a roadmap for those next steps, but also some really negative emotions: grief, anger, sadness, the fact that you've gone through so much of your life not fully understanding yourself. And there's been various studies that have shown there's a link between mental health struggles and late diagnosis, which isn't surprising. If you go through years of your life not understanding your strengths or why some things may be a struggle, it's going to impact your confidence, and maybe your amount of energy that you're spending on masking, on trying to fit in. So it's a really important topic, and one that I'm glad that we get the opportunity to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to have a short look at masking in a little while, actually. But for me, it's just so sad to think that so much time could have gone by, and all those missed opportunities and an understanding. It's tragic, really. But what I would say to the people on the call is that if this is getting you thinking and you've got questions for both Mark and Fiola, then by all means put those in the Q&A section, and we'll start to pick those up. But just staying with you for a second, Fiola, we hear a lot about how much support there is with getting official diagnosis, and you just mentioned that yourself. And in fact, one of the pre-registration questions that we actually received before today was around how we best support colleagues who feel strongly that they need that diagnosis but are struggling. So what you just said is a great segue into this. So just how are neurodivergent conditions identified, and for people in this position, how do they go about getting support?
Yeah, so for all conditions that come under the umbrella of neurodiversity, there is an assessment process. So it'll often be a series of tests. You might have an interview. Your relatives, friends might be spoken to, particularly if it's, talking about your childhood. And it can be difficult to access them. As I said, waiting lists are very long. In some areas in the UK, you can be waiting 5 years for an ADHD assessment. And if you feel like you need to have that assessment, you need that formal diagnosis, 5 years can be too long to wait. You don't want that to sort of damage your work life or the rest of your life. There are things that obviously that you can do. So there's organisations who provide private assessments, and where possible, it's definitely worth employers looking at maybe part funding some of those assessments, going via Access to Work if possible, but also making changes, making adjustments without waiting for that formal diagnosis. So under the Equality Act 2010, the main piece of legislation around discrimination, equality, inclusion in the UK, a diagnosis isn't actually an essential for disability protection. So the law in the UK frames disability as something that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your day-to-day life. So that just means something that happens for more than 12 months and is more than minor or trivial. There's no exhausted list of what is or isn't covered, and it's very similar in lots of other countries. So that means if someone comes to you and they say, I'm struggling, I'm having regular difficulties with just these normal work tasks, then it's best as an employer, as an IOSH professional, as a colleague, as a friend, to treat that as a disability, to make adjustments, to make changes, to see where you can be flexible on working spaces, or you can provide different software, have a different environment. So although that diagnosis is really important, and I would recommend wherever possible supporting people financially if necessary to achieve that diagnosis, it's also great to adapt just to be flexible, recognizing that neurodiversity is so common and that diversity of all types exists within our workplaces, adjusting the way that we work, maybe addressing what we think is the norm or is essential. Is it actually essential, or is it just the way that things have always been, the way that we've always worked? Making those small changes can often really be a relief to people who are neurodivergent, accepting that, you know, someone might prefer to start a little bit later or not to always have their camera on during meetings. That's not the end of the world. You know, your team is still going to function, but it might give somebody else that freedom to be themselves, to relax and to be able to perform, be really productive and thrive at work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you were talking there, what's going through my mind is what I've done to support my team member Emily, and we've been through that exact same process. And now that she's got everything that she needs, and we've made all those adjustments, you just mentioned the word thrive, and the thing that came into my head as you were talking was that all of those things we've done to support Emily means that she is absolutely thriving. She is brilliant, and just her whole world, I think, in our organization has changed with all of those realizations. And that, I mean, that makes me really happy. It makes her really happy. And you know, by Jove, is she going places now that everybody understands how we can get the best from her talents. It's fantastic. But Mark, I want to come back to this thing about masking, because I was really interested to watch the two-part BBC series that Chris Packham did with four individuals that he spent time with and what have you. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I'll be honest, I apologize, I can't remember what it was actually called, but if you put Chris Packham and neurodiversity into BBC iPlayer, it will come up. It was a brilliant two-part series, and one thing that there was a big discussion on was masking, and there's a lot of talk about that. So can you tell us what is this, and why is it so important that we actually understand it?
It comes down to essentially trying to fit in, and there's also an area where you could argue it's trying to block things out. Like I was having a conversation with somebody who is also ADHD, and it also does what I do for a living. And I did some mock interviews to help them with some of their training. And I says, "Oh, I didn't even notice the light." And she says, "Well, you probably masked it out." Well, sometimes you don't even realize that you're doing it, but sometimes it's a conscious thing, and you're trying to fit in. Square peg, round hole. You're shaving off your corners. You're not being you. Now, if you're not being you, you're not relaxed. How can you move forward? You can't. And it has a negative effect on your mental health, your well-being. And then that, I use the word contagion again, it's like a virus. It spreads into negative, lots of other areas. And you're not yourself. It's a massive negative effect. So masking is essentially, you can mask a light or some sound. Not everyone can, you know, or a smell or something, or it could be trying to mask a presentation of your condition. There is something called the frontal lobe paradox, which a lot of autistics have it, and a lot of people with ADHD have it as well, where on a one-to-one situation, say, or it might be at the doctor's, it might be a job interview, or it might be in a small team meeting or whatever, you don't appear on the surface that this is what's a hidden disability. You don't appear like you're struggling with anything. But my God, you are. You're pedaling really fast. Paddling. Mixing my metaphors up. I'm riding a bike on the water, aren't you? Yeah, I'm a duck on the water. Yeah, you're pedaling really, paddling really fast.
Yeah.
And on the smooth, but you know, you're trying to remember things, and you can't, and you're getting stressed, and you're anxious, and there's there's two. So they're not really used anymore. They're outdated. But there's high functioning and low functioning, and high functioning was where you needed much less support in your life. Low functioning, you'd need a lot more daily support. And I found as a high functioning individual, I think you're a lot more embarrassed, and it knocks you for six, because you're expected to be somewhere at this level, and because of your memory, your working memory, you can't hold things in mind. You keep, you don't notice that as much if you're not as high functioning. Still can be still very intelligent and so on and so forth. But that's another argument. But yeah, that's essentially what it is. It's not being yourself, or blocking things out.
And I think there's a really legitimate reason that people do that. So it might be subconscious, but it might also be a conscious decision. And that's because ultimately we still live in a society where there is a lot of bias, there are a lot of negative stereotypes, and people are protecting themselves. Masking is a way to camouflage, to try and hide or disguise parts of yourself to make sure you fit in better with others. And it means you avoid failure, you avoid rejection, you avoid ridicule. And in the workplace, it might mean that you can progress, you're included. So there's some research that was done a couple of years ago by the Institute of Leadership and Management that found that 50% of managers admitted that they would be uncomfortable hiring someone neurodivergent. Admitted. So that probably means that there's more who would feel uncomfortable. And so, many people who are neurodiverse experience exclusion or discrimination, damaging stereotypes within the workplace, and masking is a way to try and avoid that. There's still this really common misconception that, thinking in a different way means you're less able or less intelligent. It's not true. It just means you're different. But until we can kind of change everybody else's way of thinking about neurodiversity, masking is often a way to kind of keep yourself safe, but it can be exhausting. It replaces that like external stress with an internal stress, so reducing risk around mental ill health, stress, exhaustion, and it can cause emotional dysregulation as well. So they sometimes call it the Coke bottle effect, which I quite like. So imagine you shake up a Coke bottle for ages. Once you finally take that lid off, it's just going to erupt everywhere. And it's the same sort of thing. You can mask all day and you come home and suddenly there's this overwhelming amount of emotions due to you being exhausted or overstimulated. So obviously, sometimes masking can be beneficial as it helps us to sort of fit in, get along in the world, but actually it would be better if we could change some of those norms that mean that people don't have to pour so much energy into fitting into, an environment that perhaps wasn't built with them in mind.
And do you know that again, this is the scenario that actually raised me to start asking questions with my daughter, because she used to come home from school and she would be absolutely fine, and all of a sudden, bang, and all this stuff to do with maths and everything came out. And to start with, I was a little bit bewildered as to what she couldn't pinpoint what it was. And what I then realised was that all the way during the day, she'd been masking up to that session, and then of course that Coke bottle, as you just said, went bang, and then she came home and it just all came out. And yet, you could sort of see her for 1 or 2 days before her maths lesson every week getting more and more anxious and wound up, and now it all makes complete sense. And what it does is for me it sort of just emphasizes the importance of people understanding why this subject area is just so important. So if we can stay with you, Fiola, because I want to come to some questions from the people who've dialed in today, but just to take one other question from someone who registered before today. How can we promote, educate, and then change the language around neurodiversity in workplaces? And I'll come to you with the same thing in a second, Mark.
I think that is a great question, and I'll be brief because I know that people have put stuff in the Q&A and want to make sure we've got time for those.
Sure.
But I would put it down to 3 different things. So talking, learning, and challenging. And the 3 of those are interlinked. In terms of talking, it means not ignoring the topic. So this is a great step. Sharing lived experience, so where people are comfortable saying, this is what I've experienced, or someone I have managed, these are the things that I did. So actually having the conversation is the first thing. And that is a huge step to removing stigma. It's particularly helpful if leaders, people with that sort of big sphere of influence, can talk about their own lived experience if they feel comfortable doing so. Second, learning. So educating ourselves, which, like about 200 people who are on this call are doing. Fantastic. So things like attending webinars, and we will delve a lot more into this, into including neurodivergent people in the workplace in the next webinars in the series. So this is a great thing to do. But also within your workplace, you can have workshops, but also taking responsibility for your own development. There's loads of great ways that you can learn. So go and watch the show that you mentioned earlier that's still on BBC iPlayer. Follow different people on social media. There's so many books around neurodiversity. Taking the time to learn ourselves and taking control of our own development is really important. And then finally, challenging. So calling out or calling in, whichever you prefer, so it might be publicly or privately, unacceptable behaviour, using whatever privilege you may have. So it might be that you're a manager or that you're neurotypical, so you might be taken more seriously in this particular conversation. But when you see unacceptable behaviour or you hear unacceptable language, challenging it is so important, because otherwise these sort of environments where people can't necessarily thrive, where people aren't included, just continue. So those would be my three things: talking, learning, challenging.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I mean, that's a very thorough answer. I mean, Mark, I'm just thinking to myself that I'm looking at some of these Q&A that are coming in. I don't know if you've seen any of them. I mean, there's a great one that's come in here from a friend of mine, Kate Hinder, who works at BITC, and the two of us do a lot together in my day job. And what Kate's saying, and maybe this is one for you, Mark, is many people think it's likely that neurodiversity is more prevalent than currently diagnosed. So, the notion of standard probably doesn't work so well for more than 1 in 5 of us. In your opinion, do you think we need to design organizations and how we work for a number of neurotypes as standard? This might help us be more neuro-inclusive by design. That's a great question. You've probably discussed this with some of your own clients yourself, Mark, I would imagine.
The quick answer, yes. The long answer, yes.
Well,
yeah, of course so. Inside the Autistic Mind, I was just looking it up before, I wasn't being rude. On the BBC.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Inside the Autistic Mind, yeah. We have to. I mean, a lot of organisations went down, we're going to save on lighting, so we'll have white walls everywhere and white tables. Great, you saved on lighting, but it's overwhelming. If you're dyslexic, you can have the glare, open plan, not very good from a visual distraction point of view, noise, the amount of people, and so on. Just getting to and from different places. There's the environment itself where you actually work, but then getting to that environment can be an issue. Yes, there's a whole range of things you need to look at. And navigation, is that suitable? Because how's somebody going to you might, especially if you're a new starter, and you've been there a few months. With ADHD, we've got working memory difficulties, as people with dyslexia have. So hindsight, you rely on your working memory. Well, and a lot of neurodiverse people as well work on best hands-on doing it. So learning in a classroom, nowhere near as good as learning on the job. Just let us get on with it and have lots of refresher sessions as well, inductions and things like that. Yeah, going back to the design question. Yeah, simple as that.
I would agree. I would agree, Mark, and with yourself, Kate. I mean, certainly in my day job, because I work in a construction and engineering organisation, we're constantly looking to eliminate harm in design, and we've advocated for many years that includes everything from what we build for people outside who are going to be future users of assets and buildings and what have you. But don't forget, you know, your own internal office spaces. You can design with well-being in mind, and this for me fits into that well-being space as well, because you want the people in that environment to be well and thrive, which means you can't just sort of take your typical standards and go, well, as long as we do that, we've met the minimum, because that's not the way that the world is. You need to think about the different needs from accessibility perspectives and all sorts, and that is just another way of eliminating harm. So that's a perfect answer, Mark, because you know the answer is yes, and so let's just go and do that. And I see that someone else has posted a question saying, well, what is it that employers can do? You know, what 3 things? Well, we're going to take a couple of takeaways from today, but sign up for the future webinars, because that is an area we're deliberately going to look at, because it's really important. Paul Lindsay's put a question in, and Paul's actually, apart from the fact he's someone I've known for again many years, he's also one of our own trustees here at IOSH, and he's saying that his grandson is 4 years old and he's going through a formal assessment for autism at the moment. So if appropriate, can you say a little bit about how she's facing the challenges of adulthood? Ooh, that's a big question.
I don't really specialize in children. The grown-up versus child version of autism is pretty much the same thing. But as a child, you take the word literally anyway. Who doesn't believe in Father Christmas at 8 years old? You know, I'd still like to believe in Father Christmas.
What are you saying? Is Father Christmas not real?
Yeah, he's his helpers. His helpers. Yeah, he's. Yeah, so that's me ADHD.
Can I hop in there? I think one thing that's really important to point out is that, so I think this was when you were talking about your daughter, Lawrence, in that her experiences of autism will not be the same as Paul's grandson's, because if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. You have not met every autistic person, and I think that's one thing that's so important to talk about when we discuss neurodiversity, is that actually there's diversity within that diversity. We may have the same diagnosis. Mark and I both have ADHD. We will have very different experiences of the world and of the workplace. So I think it's really important, and it kind of ties into another question where someone said, you know, well, what if I'm neurotypical and I don't know what someone in my team needs? Speak to people, listen to them, believe them, take what they're saying at face value. I think if we trust that people know themselves and their own experiences, then we can be supportive. But there isn't a universal autistic experience, Tourette's experience, dyslexic experience. Even within the neurodivergent community, there is so much variation. So it's so important to recognise that everyone is an individual, everyone is unique.
Absolutely. And Mark, Sarah Wilde's put a little bit of a sort of a case study of her own in there. But ultimately, the question is, do you think or do you not think that the UK education system needs a radical overhaul to take on board the new research and knowledge into account to make us a more inclusive society and a better future workforce? What do you think, Mark?
Absolutely, across the board. I know there is something, I don't know where it is at the minute, but Matt Hancock was on with it, wasn't he? It was, because he himself is dyslexic, he was trying to get through a bill so that every primary school child would be screened for dyslexia. And that would then obviously branch out into other associated co-occurring conditions. And so I think, yes, I think in the clinical world, I've found that a lot of people don't know much about our conditions. And I've also found that in the educational stream. And it's like these are the key areas where you need to know. If I came to start to work for you tomorrow, I could help you understand my condition, how it affects me, and then Viola, you would explain how it affects you, and then that core theme through the middle. Yeah, but yeah, the educational system, I think, massively needs an overhaul anyway. And then when you start to play into the neurodiverse aspect of things, because when I was at school, I was under challenged, and that's why I played up a bit, because I was bored, because I'm high functioning, I've got a really good level of intelligence for the Asperger's, I'm a great problem solver. I can see, not in a psychic way, but I can see solutions. I don't see problems, I see solutions. Well, why can't you just do that? It's dead easy. Done. And then you're fighting with people. And one of the things with my ADHD, I don't know if it's something you feel, but if you can't complete it, like everything's a problem to solve. Like go to the supermarket, I've got to buy some milk. That's my problem to solve in that moment. And if I get stopped halfway or diverted, it's really frustrating. Or going around the race circuit, it's really frustrating. So you've got to be able to finish that problem. And within the educational system, everybody's educated at the same speed in various formats, whether it be information they're served, their learning style, and so on. And so a lot of people are missing out on their own talents because they're not reaching their full potential. Because you're educated to the lowest stream in that class. So everybody's at the same level. So those who can go a bit quicker become frustrated, get annoyed, get further behind, and so lose out as a result. So you need different streams, and you need to have there is less and less stigma. But I know as you're a teenager, you're part of a tribe. You want to be you want to fit in. You don't want to be seen to be different. But I think rather than looking at whether or not you have a condition, there should be more assessment of where you currently are, how you learn, and then split you off into those groups so you all learn and converse at the same speed. Each group is at a different speed, but you in that group are at that level. You know, so I might be more of a sit back and think about a problem and solve it. Somebody else is like, right, I need to be hands-on and move these things about. Well, we've got a clash then. So if we're in separate groups. So yeah, the educational system, I think, massively needs it needs to know what the conditions are and how they affect everybody, what they are not. Because it's certainly not correlated with intelligence. You can be anywhere on the intelligence spectrum. That's not the issue. The IQ is like 0 to 200, isn't it? Neurotypical people, because the majority neurotypical, the Mexican curve, you're in the middle. Neurodiverse people, we're exactly the same spot, or 2 points further across, but we're in the same space. But it's just how we learn, not our IQ levels.
So let's have a think about that then, Mark. If I can turn to you, Viola, there's a couple of questions that are sort of bolted together from what's in the Q&A. Based on what Mark's saying, somebody said, look, where can we go to get some support and help if you're somebody who just wants to know more, but also if you are someone who is known to be neurodiverse, and what do we do with employers who are sort of saying, oh, we're not going to do anything until all that's been formalized and we know what we're dealing with and what have you. So a bit of a two-part question, but quite closely linked.
Okay, I'll answer that second bit first. So organizations that are saying we will not do anything until you've got a formal diagnosis and doctor's note kind of thing, are risking breaking the law. That it's that simple. And that is what I would say to them, because organizations may not be hugely understanding, but a lot are quite risk averse, and you're risking a discrimination case, because actually reasonable adjustments are just changes, any change that an organization makes to kind of mitigate any disadvantage for any sort of disability. And as I've said, there's no exhaustive list of, what is and isn't a disability. So organizations need to be taking people seriously and at face value when they say that they need a change. Otherwise, they are potentially opening themselves up to a whole load of issues. One thing that's really important in that is the word reasonable. So I know there's a question in there about, well, assessments are expensive. And what if an organisation says they can't pay that? They might not be able to pay the full amount. Can they part fund it? Recognising that actually making sure that somebody is able to thrive in the workplace is, even if you don't really care about human beings and you're only bothered about the bottom line, it's the right thing to do. Making sure that people can be productive, that they can engage, that you can get the best out of them, that they stay, because recruitment is so expensive. That's a worthwhile investment. So when we're looking at reasonable, obviously that might vary. A large organisation may be much more willing to pay for a full assessment. A smaller organisation might say, we can give you, £200 towards it, but that could make a huge difference and could mean that someone receives a diagnosis faster. And I've forgotten the first bit of the question, I'm afraid.
The first bit of the question was all about, well, where do we go for more information, as someone who might be neurodiverse, as someone who just wants to know more?
I would say one key thing is sign up to the rest of the webinars, because this has been sort of a whistle-stop tour through the basics around neurodiversity, but it's a huge topic. We're not going to cover everything within an hour. No. We won't actually even cover all of the details within the entire webinar series, but I would recommend that people do come along to the rest. There's loads of resources out there. So organisations like the Business Disability Forum, and Inclusive Employers do loads of work in this area. So make sure that you are finding those experts and speak to other people. I think the conversation throughout this has been great. The questions have been fantastic. So connect with other people, use that peer learning too.
Well, we've got 4 minutes left. I'm gutted actually, because I could quite happily sit here for another 2 or 3 hours and keep going, but we can't. So right, Mark, the one takeaway for everybody today, what's your summary sentence for them to do as of today?
As an action,
yeah,
or to think about, or
yeah.
Well, I don't correlate neurodiversity with intelligence. So when you are thinking about, I don't know, it might be CVs, you're interviewing people, or you might be, if somebody comes to you and you want to negotiate a promotion or something, or throughout the year, as a neurodiverse person, without realizing it, I underplay my conditions, or I might say that I might point out something that's wrong, even when I've done it wrong. I might burn some toast. Oh, that's burnt. That's horrible, isn't it? I'll make a cup of tea. God, that's horrible. My wife used to it now, but yeah, she makes good tea. So we will always look like, because we're just honest and we don't blag, we always look like, by the time it comes to appraisal and promotion, we're not the better candidate. Well, in fact, isn't it better to have somebody that's honest than blag? And like when you see on CVs, I've got gaps on my CV. I've worked places shut because of my conditions. Flip the narrative. If you see gaps, that's a sign of honesty. Who do you want working for you? Somebody who's blagged or somebody who's honest?
Okay, Mark. I like
always
that.
Look for the honest elements. I was going to say, with any area, not just neurodiversity, I think just give people space, time, understanding, allow for mistakes, allow extra time, and just talk to people, build trust, just have conversations, and that'll build trust, and people will start talking more and more about themselves, their conditions. They'll open up and they'll find reasons to make changes and thrive.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Fiola?
My takeaway would be to recognise that everyone is an individual. So you will very rarely get an off-the-shelf solution that suits everybody. You need to speak to people. You need to hear what they need, what their experience has been, even really simple things about how they'd like to be described. So there's a question about, whether people prefer to say I'm autistic or I have autism. That's going to vary from person to person. So speak to individuals. I think recognizing that we are all unique is so important and helps to make more inclusive organizations overall.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I'm so sad to say an hour has elapsed, but listen, there's lots more Q&A, there's lots more things in the chat, but this is just the tip of the iceberg, as you've said. But I'd like to thank you both for your contributions today. It's been a really interesting chat today. It's a hugely varied topic that, as we've said, there's no way we were going to get through today, but hopefully you've all taken away one or two things to at least start that conversation, start that ball rolling in your mind. For me, I'm going to remember the bit about scaffolding, Mark, that you mentioned earlier, because I think that's quite interesting to remember, that there is this sort of framework, and my daughter's referred to it before. But listen, before I let you go, we've mentioned a few times that this is just one of a series. So what you'll see is coming up on the screen is some details of the next session. So Tuesday the 13th of June at the same time, 12:30 UK. What we're going to be looking at is future leaders and spearheading change. And whether you're neurodivergent or not, we all need the skills and flexible solutions to understand how to get the best from our own careers. So we're going to be hearing from some leaders who share their personal experiences of what they and their employers have actually done to enable them to achieve the best for themselves personally and to thrive. And if you scan that QR code, or if you go onto the IOSH website, you can actually sign up for that next one. So please come and get the next instalment. So thank you to all of you for showing interest in this massively important subject area. Fiola, Mark, thank you for your time today. I really hope to see you again soon. I've been Lawrence Webb. Take care. See you again.